Ted Mitchell, Chancellor of the Tech University System, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And so I wanted to ask you about one of the things that we discussed with the Dallas FBI. The outgoing special agent in charge said one of his biggest concerns is about the Communist Chinese Party and the theft of intellectual property. And one of the things that he specified was research at the university level. And so I'm wondering, as Chancellor, how big of a concern is this to you?
Well, Jack, one of the things that we're constantly trying to balance is the collaborative nature of scientists in general. And you have people around the country, in fact, around the globe, that oftentimes are working in similar areas, and they are collaborative by nature. So we're working on balancing that with the work that these scientists are doing. We have, for example, scientists here that have been working on single proteins for the entirety of their career. So protecting the work they've done over the course of their careers. We're living in a world where technology has changed dramatically, where the world itself has changed dramatically. And the approach that we're taking is one where, instead of being kind of a gotcha mentality and looking for things where it's about getting law enforcement to arrest people and prosecute people, really where we're focused more on educating people and preventing things on the front end. And that is distinctly a balance, because we do want to be able to encourage collaboration and yet at the same time protect oftentimes the life work of our researchers that have put in their blood, sweat, and tears over the course of years to create their labs and their work.
And how dangerous the situation is it where, their life's work, all of their research is slipping into the wrong hands, being stolen, if you will?
Sure. Well, this is the way we were describing it the other day. We are a target. If you talk about the way the world works right now with research universities, what we all know, what you and I know as an American university today, is actually an amalgamation. If you go back and look at the standard research university worldwide now, it's actually an amalgamation of two educational processes. You have what's called the Oxbridge educational system, which came from Cambridge and Oxford, that talk about the focus on small classrooms and education and things of that nature. But the American Research University was the amalgamation of that with the German approach, which was real heavy on research. So if you look at the first American Research University, it was actually Johns Hopkins in the late 1800s that started this model that is now everywhere. So what it does is it makes American universities a rich target for people from around the world. And so in the world that we're living in, what we're trying to do is country agnostic. It doesn't, the FBI has very specific groups that they focus on, but for us, it's just trying to make sure that we're doing things to protect our scientists, protect their life's work, and while simultaneously working to make sure that we can be as collaborative as possible with everybody that we work with.
And so what are you doing to ensure that, A, people can work collaboratively, professor, from our country to others, but at the same time, making sure that their research is being protected?
Absolutely. Great question. So on the front end of it, we're making sure that we are crystal clear with everybody about what our efforts are, meaning we want all of our professors, we want all people that are going to be visiting our campuses to understand that we're going to be doing background checks that are more extensive than what we would normally do. And let me tell you where a big vulnerability is. In research labs all around the country, and this goes back to when I was doing public health research, you'll be at a meeting, a national meeting, and somebody will approach you and say, hey, are you working on this, or this? And we'll say, yes, we're working on that. Well, we're working on the same thing. Can we get together? So there are a lot of visiting professors that travel back and forth to universities. And where you are highly vulnerable is with a lot of these visiting professors that are coming there literally for just a week or two. Because historically, we've not done background checks on those folks. We are starting to do that now to make sure that if somebody's coming to our campus, even if it's for a short period of time, that we know where they're from, we know whether or not they're being financed by government agencies elsewhere, so that we can take the correct protective action on the front end to make sure that they're not exposed or not gaining access to things that might be sensitive, or things that could be utilized or taken elsewhere. One of the things that is happening is in some countries, they're setting up what they call shadow labs, where you'll get people coming into our labs here, taking looks at things and simultaneously sending the information back to their country and set up a lab there. Oftentimes, what we're told is that they don't even know exactly what it is they're trying to get. They just want to get everything they can, even if it's simple lab techniques that they can use to improve things in their country that would put us at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to publications, when it comes to the research itself, when it comes to competitive grants with organizations like the NIH and the like. We need to make sure that our folks can remain competitive with what they do.
Have you had any specific issues of that, what you just described at your university system?
We actually have. We've had issues where someone would be here and unfortunately, this was the old kind of catch them and prosecute them thing, where something would happen, that something was discovered that was a bit untoward in a lab, and upon investigation and audit of that area, you find out there is something going on that shouldn't be going on, and someone actually had an affiliation with the university in a foreign country that we were unaware of, and then you wind up having to go after this individual. But the approach that we've taken has been kind of like whack-a-mole. You know, you do it here and then it pops up there, and that's what we want to stop doing. We don't want our faculty members to feel that this is some clandestine thing that we're doing through cloak and dagger. We want to be very upfront with everybody that we're going to do things to prevent this from happening on the front end. So we want to be crystal clear that as folks come to visit us, we want them here, but we're going to do background checks on them to make sure that we're protecting our own faculty with the work they do.
And let me ask you, what was the result of that specific case? What ended up being lost?
What wound up, well, we don't know exactly what was lost. What wound up happening was that particular individual wound up leaving the country. And that's the whole problem with this is when you have folks that are embedded in your labs, we don't know exactly what all's being lost. And that's one of the big issues. One of the things that was discussed during this conference with the FBI was the fact that at a place like MD Anderson, where they have massive amounts of research going on, things are being just siphoned off a little bit at a time. And by the time you realize there's a problem, you're not even sure what the damage is that's been done to your research lab. And again, keep in mind, it's with a lot of this research, it's not that you're trying to stop people from collaborating with one another. What you are trying to do is to make sure that when you have somebody that is putting their life's work into an area, that somebody else somewhere else is not taking that and using for other things. Whether it's discovery science with drugs, whether it's discovery science and basic sciences like protein research and the like, these are things that if we're not careful about protecting it, there are economic ramifications for patents and other things like that. But as importantly, you're taking folks that, again, their life's work is being taken from them, oftentimes without them even knowing it.
When did you start the background checks on visiting professors?
Very recently. This is something we started. What we did was the first round of this, we actually changed a lot. Every year that all of our professors have to sign a conflict of interest and conflict of time policy or statement that is part of our policy that goes through and says, I'm working for Texas Tech University and I am not spending my time working for other universities elsewhere. And that was the first step in this, just to be clear with everybody where it is they're spending their time, what it is they're doing, and making sure that they've not picked up affiliations with foreign universities that may have foreign governments behind them. So that was the first step that we did. And we've done that over the course of about the past 18 months with all 5 of the universities in our system. The second step to that, which is much more recent, is then to start saying, okay, where do we have issues with this? We started doing, if you've got somebody that comes in that's going to be a faculty member for a 6-month period or for an academic year, we've already done background checks on those folks. But where we found the vulnerability, not just here, but one of the things the FBI discusses is it's really not those individuals that are your biggest problem. The biggest problem are these people that are just coming and going. And that is something, Jack, that we all do. We do that across the country where, again, we're at meetings and things. We bump into somebody that's interested in the research that we do. We invite them here. They invite us there. And that's where it's pretty, the policies for that have been very loosey-goosey. And that's what we're trying to tighten up right now.
And was the impetus for these new tightened policies the case that you discussed before?
That's one of the emphasis for it. And the other is, just as we've discussed this with the folks at the FBI and other agencies, when you start seeing what has happened in other institutions that it's been far more problematic, it just gives pause to what it is that we're doing. What I would prefer for us to be able to do is do this before we have issues that have occurred at other places like at MD Anderson, where by the time you have figured it out, it's not one individual or two individuals, it's dozens of people that have been coming and going that you were unaware of. So we're trying to stop it before we have issues like some of our sister institutions have had.
Just a couple of more questions, and I appreciate your time, Chancellor. You mentioned this meeting that the FBI hosted at its headquarters recently, and did you hear other horror stories from other universities, and what role did you play in that meeting?
Well, so I gave one of the addresses, one of the talks about it. And what I was trying to do with a lot of my the folks that are also in academics is really just kind of give a background on why it is that we're vulnerable and talk about that, why we in higher education in general are vulnerable. And a large part of that is what I've already described. Our institutions are built to be collaborative. And our institutions that don't only just educate, but also then do things to produce knowledge for the world, we're set up in a way that makes us vulnerable because we want to be collaborative and we're doing things that are designed to benefit society as a whole. So we're vulnerable. So that's part of what my presentation was. This is why we in higher education in general are vulnerable. To answer the first part of your question, you better believe there were some real horror stories about things that have happened. And I will tell you, one of the things, and this is not Ted Mitchell speaking, but one of the presentations that one of the FBI agents gave was how we've been focused since 2001 on the war on terror. And rightfully so in many ways, but our focus has been on this so intensely for the past 2 decades that what we've not been paying attention to, especially in areas like higher education, is this war on information. And so if you look over the past 20 years, that's where things have really skyrocketed as far as intellectual property theft with certain countries from around the world. And we've been, I'm going to use the word oblivious, and I'm using it, and maybe that's too strong a word, but more or less we've been oblivious to that because our focus as a nation has been on something else. But if you look at areas like something as simple as having somebody as a foreign national in your lab that's willing to do a lot of great work, and their name goes as the first author on one of the research papers. Well, when your name is the first author on a research paper, you become what's called the corresponding author most often, which means when the NIH or other funding institutions are looking to give you money, they're going to go to the corresponding author. And what has happened over the past 20 years, more and more in American universities of our first authors are actually foreign nationals that moving forward then, when the NIH is looking for funding, they're going to them, not back to those institutions for that funding. So there's been this real shift in the number of foreign nationals that are being paid by the United States government for doing research. Oftentimes they're doing not just here in the United States, but they're doing in foreign countries in these shadow laboratories. And so it's this real kind of a lopsided thing that has occurred right under our nose over the past 20 years.
Last question, and that is, has state law been beefed up to address this? And if not, does it need to be?
Great question. And the answer is no, state law hasn't been beefed up to address this, but this is something that has been made, our state legislators are becoming aware that this is an issue. And so here's the balance. And I'll go right back to what I said at the very beginning. The balance is, how do we protect our faculty and protect their work while still maintaining a sense of collaboration with the folks that we need to work with around the nation and around the globe to create knowledge for the world. But this is going to be a conversation coming up during this next legislative session.
Well, Ted Mitchell, Chancellor of the Texas Tech University System, we really appreciate your insight and your time on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack. Take care.
You too.